We're delighted to be joined now by Professor Kate Williams, who is a historian and broadcaster and author who currently works at the University of Reading. Kate, thank you so much for joining us.
For having me.
What did you think of the event?
The event I thought was fantastic. I thought we really went deep into the questions about globalization. I was really excited by all the students there. I'm incredibly impressed that on the first day of term, when everyone could be in the student bar, they were with us listening to the debate, and these fantastic questions that we got, all the hundreds of questions that were gotten, these were the ones that were put down, but also so many people wanting to talk and so many people wanting to talk to us later. So I really I thought it was fantastic, and I really do think that there are many problems in the world, but what makes me feel very optimistic is how much young people are so engaged, are so excited, and I hope that you lot are going to sort everything out, because the other generations have rather wrecked things.
Okay, what has been the cause of a lot of the anti-globalization sentiment that we've been discussing in the Q&A, in Britain specifically, and also in America?
I think the cause of the anti-globalisation sentiment, a large amount of it, and the growth of it, and the becoming mainstream, a lot of it is linked to a perception among a certain grouping that they have been left behind. And there is a perception, particularly among a grouping that has previously had all the privilege, is men, white men of a certain wealth, are increasingly feeling left behind, as if they are going to be overtaken, as if they're being pushed to the back of the queue. And we saw that very clearly around the Brexit vote. We saw that very clearly around the discussion about America, making America great again, bringing jobs back. It is blue-collar America, it is blue-collar Britain, but there are other swathes of life as well, other swathes of jobs as well. And so the anti-globalization movement, I think, so much of it is about the fact that although Britain is, we can debate it, the 6th or 7th richest country in the world, that a lot of that does not filter down to people, and people feel poor. They can't buy a house, their groceries are going up, their salaries don't stretch, childcare is expensive, and what you have in so much of what's being created is a response to the global economic crash of 2008 and the government policy of austerity, and so much of the Brexit discussions, there was people saying, I can't get a GP appointment, and there's no space in the school I want for my child. It's because immigrants are taking it, and that's not correct. When you look at the facts, it's not correct. What it's about is a government austerity policy, and it's very difficult for us to say to ourselves, is the reason why I'm unhappy is because of government austerity policies. It's much easier for people to say it's about immigration, it's about globalization, it's about the EU. Everything that the EU was blamed for in the Brexit vote, everything that it was blamed for is at base, is particularly inequality, is at base created by British government policy. It's not the EU policy. And so we have a situation in which a bus goes around Britain saying we give 350 million to the EU, which we didn't. Let's give it to the NHS instead. And what we have currently is the fact that our payment to the EU is much, much greater because of the crash in the pound. That the NHS, it's been agreed in the Lancet, is going to be damaged by any form of Brexit because so many of the workers will go. The drugs are going to be changing in prices in the drug agencies. So what people were told and what is the truth is not the same thing. So the anti-globalization movement, if you're saying Brexit was an anti-globalization vote, those people have voted for a lot of the hard Brexit, so even more extreme globalization. It's cutting taxes, it's cutting regulation, it's making Britain a tax haven, and that's not what they voted for.
Okay, so in light of that, what future do you see for globalization?
I think in terms of global capitalism, I think it's only going to increase because global capitalism is based on our own personal desires for things, and we want things. We want ever more things. We want clothes, and we want phones, and we want televisions. And once upon a time, people if you say even 20 years ago, most houses had, a record player and a television and maybe a couple of lights, and now there are lights and there are phones and there are iPads, and every child has an iPad. Most children have phones. We are a culture that loves to consume, and so globalization is driven by our own consumer choices. And so if we continue in that way, if we continue to say, I need this, I want this, I have to have this, if we continue to associate fun and celebration and love, if we continue to associate all of those with giving presents, with buying things, with consuming, then globalization is not going to stop. what we have to think about is how it affects the rest of the world, how our desire for phones affects the rest of the world, pollution, use of resources, and how it politically, what happens when politically governments go to war over resources.
Okay, Brexit was referred to quite frequently throughout the discussion. What are your thoughts on Brexit as it is happening at the moment?
My thoughts on Brexit, as it is happening at the moment, my thoughts on Brexit is that it was sold to the British population on a lie. It was sold to the British population that if we come out of the EU, we'll have more money for the NHS. Farmers thought that coming out of the EU would mean that they could use the pesticides they wanted but wouldn't use their subsidies. And what we saw over and over again during the EU campaign, the Brexit campaign, was many politicians such as Daniel Hannan, such as indeed Mr Johnson, saying it'll be all the same, we'll still get the subsidies, they'll still all buy our goods, everything's going to be great because we're Great Britain. So the basic vision was that everything would still be exactly the same, we wouldn't lose a thing because Germany needed us more than we needed them. And what we see over and over again is we're engaging in economic suicide. It's economically already a disaster. Companies are leaving. The pound has crashed. It does not make, with a crashing pound, does not make exports cheaper because we import so much to create those exports. So we're engaging with an economic disaster. Already inflation makes our payments much more. And we've got a political disaster on our hand because Article 50 was triggered a long time ago, and only now we're beginning to lay out some kind of policy. And for questions like the Irish border, which is a huge problem, if we come out of the customs union, the single market, we have to have a hard border in Ireland. No one wants that. There is a lack of ability and desire in all forms of government to engage with what the truth of Brexit is going to be, to give people the unpalatable truth, and to create some kind of policy. So we're seeing an economic disaster, and we're seeing a complete lack of leadership in politics. So we are in a bad way.
Okay, and finally, how do you think history will look upon us when all of this is past?
There's a Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, and we are living through interesting times with Brexit, with Mr Trump, with globalization, with what is happening to the world. We are living through interesting times, and it is difficult and it is painful, but certainly we will be part of history that is infinitely discussed. Our responses, our reactions will be infinitely discussed and infinitely looked at. And to me as a historian, what's very interesting is so much of your life is the search for documents. You really want to find out the documents. You really want the document. And say, for example, from the 18th century, we're always looking, we want the working class response to something. We don't want to read yet another educated upper class person with their diary. It's very hard to find that working class response. It's very hard to find all the voices. But what's of course, the great thing about talking now, about historians who look at this period, is how many voices through social media, through Twitter, through Facebook, how many voices we'll have and how they're banked and discussed. But in the future, we will be looked at by historians as a fascinating period. We'll basically be on the GCSE syllabus, the A-level syllabus, and the university syllabus. But we will be looked at by our descendants as people who had everything, who were the sixth richest country in the world. We had a lot of inequality, but that wasn't the EU's fault. We had an economy that was booming. We were admired across the world, and we threw it all away in an act of economic suicide that was created by lies, but also created by a hard right wing who want Britain to be a low tax, low regulation tax haven, and who cares what happens to the people.
Kate Williams, thank you so much.